In this video, I would like to introduce you to the process of how we can attach different materials to our geometry. So for example, we can communicate that this is a hardwood floor, that is a wall that's decorated with a wallpaper and a logo, and for example, whatever material we would like to be attached to the table. Let's go to a browser for the moment. So when you're looking for textures, the keyword you want to search for is seamless and also tileable. So what does that mean? I have this image here enlarged, and seamless basically means if I take this tile and I multiply in the area with it, so I take this image, put it to the left, and above, you will see that this half part is actually the missing half part for here. So the whole idea is that when you start multiplying those tiles, you will get something like here, where you just see the pattern perfectly without any seams or breaks flooding or flowing basically over your surface. And I have here one image. You can basically see that the center is brighter and the corners are darker. So here we have a nice repetitive pattern that works well. However, this lighting effect is really bad. If we would take this image and actually tile it, you will see basically this visual effect being multiplied over your object, and that's not good. So when you look for material examples, here for example is another one where you can see that this area is brighter, the corners are darker. Step away from those, they're not really usable, and you have to use something that's really nice and yeah, basically has no lighting effect on it. So just flat images, they work the best. When we go to, for example, let's maybe start with a wood floor. So tileable wood floor texture. And what I'm looking here for is a nice and clean orientation, left and right, up and down. And for example, the ability that if I'm going to multiply it, let's open maybe this one, that maybe all those lines on my right side will also meet up on the left side. And that is pretty important, so I can actually completely fill this area here with this image and multiply this image, multiple parts over the ground floor, and then give the viewer the illusion that there is kind of like a handmade wood floor. And for example here, this one is not good. You can actually see here this is brighter, darker and brighter, so this highlight or shadow pattern you will see easily actually when we would use that one. Also, this one has very dark and very bright patterns. It's kind of tileable, but again, those parts will stick out a lot. This is actually, for example, very harmonious and will work pretty well, so that the values are not very different. So let's see which of those textures maybe I might use. And let's maybe use this one. So I'm going to either drag it onto the desktop. On my Mac, I'm going to save it onto my desktop. So wood floor, I just call this one bright. And let me go back. I would like to have something that's maybe dark. And this is, for example, another one that doesn't work. That's not really usable at all. You know what? I'm going to use this one so you simply can see the problem I expressed when I saw this one. Oh, actually, no, this doesn't work. There's a small thing here. It says here it won't really line up correctly. So let's see if I can find maybe a different one that could show the same problem. Not sure about this one. Maybe let's give this one a try. Okay. You also see this image is decently large, so that's very important. So let's say wood floor dark. So you see here it says 1000 by 1024. That's the amount of pixels, so that's pretty good. If you have something like 300 or 200, forget those images. They're not really usable. For example, here this is way too small. That's actually pretty good. That's kind of borderline. Okay, okay, it's also good. That is actually, I would say, too small. Okay, so how do we bring this wood material now into Fusion? That's actually pretty easy. We can go to Modify and Parents. And maybe starting with an unfinished material. And I can just, whatever I have here, simply drag it, actually not onto the object, just the top face here. Let's go into top view. And there actually you see, for example, that this texture is tiled and it's not really seamless. If I zoom in really closely, you can actually see where the different textures meet each other. So it actually blends a little bit, but you can see that the way how the wood looks actually generates a very noticeable and repetitive pattern. Now, of course, this is a piece of veneer. That's the reason why it looks this way. It's not really suitable for this type of task. But now with having this material attached, all we can do, double click the material cherry, double click or click on advanced. And we simply have to swap out the wood material. So let the material editor load for a second. And then here, for example, we have under parameters, the material. This bump for the moment we can turn off. Also here, for example, we can set this to slider and then go to edit image. Under source, we click. And then, for example, we can, let's start maybe with the dark one. Open it. And let me go to my desktop for the moment. So you see that this image is actually a very square. Let me see the pixels. So yes, it's exactly square. And that was important to check, because our next step, you see under scale, it's 18 by 36. And that's not really good. What I want is actually, this image I have should cover a surface of maybe 36 by 36. So the texture will be placed over a rectangular area. And then once I made those two settings the same, I can click back the log here, because now when I change this one to 20, you see the other one will update. And now I can play with those values a little bit, and you will see the texture result updating in real time. And actually now you can see that because of those really different contrasts of really dark and really bright wood planks, you can start seeing, actually, if I tile this one a lot with a small scale, so for example 25, then you see like the pattern immediately sticks out, because there's not enough randomness to this texture right now. So when I make this one bigger, 100, I can start getting the feeling that these wood planks are too big. So right now you would have to kind of like measure out or guess maybe how big this texture has to be so it feels scale-wise simply correct. Ideally, one way how you can do it is when you count the amount of wood planks and you would figure out the standard width of a wood plank, and then you can just multiply the width by the amount of vertical planks and basically put that into the width. Then you have, for example, a correct size. Also here, if we would like to rotate the material, I could go to position rotation, type in 90, tab, or 45. So it's actually pretty nice. Repeat, for example, that is what I meant with tiling. You see, for example, where now the first tile would be. It's there. So horizontally you can tile it, and vertically you can tile it. And that's the reason why you need to have seamless and well tileable materials. So let's take a look at the other material I have here, the wood floor, bright. And there you can see already, because the color variation is not as strong, there's a certain level of repetition, but it doesn't stick out as much. I can hide it better. Let's take a look at the ratio. So this is 1000 by 700, so kind of like 1 and like 75%. So now I could actually maybe here type in, let's see, 100 by 70. Oops, I have to, of course, turn this one off. There. Now you see, now I get actually width and height. Something that is maybe similar to the amount of pixels. I could actually, if I want to be even more precise, we could trick around a little bit. So 1024 by 768. So let's do this. 1000. I think this should work. 1024 by 736. Okay, now you see this image is way too big, but hold on, not a big deal. We're going to fix this actually in the next step. So you see the scale with inches here, I goofed around a little bit. I simply made in inches the image as big as I have pixels of this image. Click OK. And OK. And it takes a second, because then when I double click my material here, with scale I can actually then adjust a scale factor. Right now I have the rotation correct and maybe the tiling for the scale, and then with the scale in this dialog I can override, for example, the initial size I specified. Let's see if I can maybe rotate the piece here as well, but you see there are, if I go to 0, there seems to be a problem. It's not really rotating back to 0. So the scale we can work here, but with rotation there seems to be a slight problem. So if I go back to edit image, you will see that it actually maintains like 14 degrees. So if I've set this to 0, then it's truly really 0. Okay. So that's, for example, how, as you can see, we applied two different wood materials with a different format, square and rectangular shape, onto the surface. Now let's take a look at what we can do with the wall. It's pretty much the same. Maybe I will start with something like paper, because it's a wallpaper. Double click it and click advanced. Also here for roughness, Actually, maybe I'll leave it, but no, I just say slider. I will go into what really relief and roughness means just in a moment. Go to edit image, paper base, and let's go to wallpapers. Let's select one pattern that's maybe easy to replicate so you understand what tiling means. Well, actually, you know what? Let's select this one. It's not the nicest one, but it will serve well for the demonstration. And let's call this wallpaper 1. I'm going to select another one as well. This one will be good actually to show that this will not work. So view image and save as. There. Okay, perfect. So let me actually start with the bad one. So I'm selecting that image. Okay. And let's zoom in a little bit. And I might have to adjust the proportions for my tiling first. So here's wallpaper 2. Let's take a look what we have. 1000. So make it like 13 by 16. So 13 by 16 and 1625. There you can see that no matter what I do, I can't really get this piece to tile, because essentially it can't really tile, because this image itself simply does not allow that. So 1625, yeah, okay. So even if I now maybe change, oops, perfect. I didn't save my dialog first for the material, so it went back to the paper one. Okay, but let's go back, advanced, swap this one out there. Okay, edit image. And let's do this one more time. So 13, 16, 25. 13 centimeters by 16.25 centimeters. And I simply use centimeters because this way I can quickly put in the correct proportion. You see also Fusion then adjusted the same, converted into inches. Really nice. Okay, and okay. And then adjust the size. And there you see like all these cuts. So that's, for example, a good case for where the tiling simply doesn't work. It's not seamless at all. So let's load in actually the wallpaper we want. So I go to edit image, and there's this wallpaper. Now this one is rectangular, so I can easily set this one maybe to 12 inch by 12 inch. And there you see now, you cannot see where one tile really was. No matter how small I make this one, it's impossible to see. So this works actually pretty well. So let's take a look at how we can actually put a logo onto the wall. And that one is actually very easy. and that's really well solved. So when you're looking for logos, you can look for PNG or SVG, or for example, what you want to look for is transparent background. And most of the time you will, for every brand online, find the logo with a transparent background. So for example, let me go to images and see what do we have here. Maybe let's click on this one. Oh, perfect. That's actually with a transparent background already. You see Macy logo transparent, it even says it. You see this, the background, what's white, is actually kind of like filled with a checkboard. And this checkerboard is a tool to tell you that actually there is no white background, which is also the reason why you have to use PNG and not JPEG, because JPEGs don't really support a transparent background. They only support a white background. This, for example, has a white background, so this one is not going to be ideal. This one is white. That one is white. Oh, that's the one that's transparent. Also here, the logo, you need to have a decent size because we make this image really large. So you need like a good amount of pixels. So 1,000 along one side is okay. I'm a little bit concerned about this being below 300, but we will see how this will work. Okay, so view image, and then I can drag it or simply again save it on my desktop. Okay. And then to place that logo, we go to Insert, Decal, and then it asks you to select the face. So I'm selecting this wallpaper face. Then it asks me to select my image. There's the image, open. And then you can see you can move this logo around. We can rotate it. We can squeeze it or stretch it, and we can override those values here. And let's make this one 0. And interesting, it does not set everything back to 1 as it should. Okay, let's click cancel for the moment. Let's do this again. There, now that's good. And to scale it proportionally, so X and Y at the same time, you can see I can click on this arc. Now there's a function called chain faces. You see actually that this decal flows around it. If I turn this one off, then this decal is only noticeable on this one face. This one I'm selecting here right now, this one. So let's go back there. So you see when I move this one over, it just stops at that wall. It doesn't flow around anymore. Let's maybe make this one same size as the table. A little bit there. And let's move it up. And okay. Perfect. So for decals, you see you will get a new folder. There's the decal, right click, edit. Then you can go back to move it wherever you want. You can also hide it. So you see, it's a very nice and easy way how to place the logo of a company to have the specific branding. We can actually use this trick also to stretch a texture over certain parts of an object. So let's go to the wood veneer section, and let me see if there's somewhere a nice material we could play with. Maybe 600. Let's see which one might be good. Yeah, let's maybe try this one out. So as you can see, those are different sheets of veneer glued against each other. So that's actually quite normal in the way how you can do it in the real world. So I call this one veneer 1. And actually I would like to have another veneer just for test. Yeah, let's use this one. And save as. Okay. Veneer 2. So I can go to, for example, the decal and select faces. And you see now I'm selecting all those faces only. I do not have chain faces turned on. Okay, now I have to reselect these faces. Click on select image. And maybe let's start with veneer there. Okay, there it is. Can move it around. Maybe go into a top view, move it to there, and then we can scale it maybe as wide as we need. So you see, if I want to make this object to flow all over the part, I have to scale up the texture, and you see now the veneer looks like under a microscope, as this is way too big. So let's see what else maybe I could try to do. So I'm tricking around a little bit, and this is a really nice way to make a quick study before I create the material. And then I'm stretching now this material. Let's move this one there, stretch it out. Okay, maybe like this. Perfect. Now this is of course fake, but again, now if you show something from a distance like here, you can communicate what your intent is, so that this maybe should be a table with a bent plywood design, or for example it is of a different material and we have a veneer or laminate surface glued over the top. This texture is stretched. Of course, it's not 100% correct, but again, it's just about communicating this point, just an idea quickly, or for yourself to see if this might look good. And also, you see, because of the faces I selected in the tiling, those other faces will not get that decal. So you see, I used the decal actually simply to texture the whole part. We can actually go and create another decal onto the same object. Okay, so faces are still selected. Select image, veneer, open. Oh, actually I'm replacing the original veneer. That's not really what I want. So let's do this again. Decal, I think because I had the decal selected, I went into edit mode for that decal, because you can also swap out the image, but that's not what I wanted. I simply would like to have one or two different versions, so I can turn them on and off quickly to get an idea if it will look good or bad or not at all. And now I'm scaling this one to the size I need. So let's see if I have to stretch this a little bit. Okay, good. And there, for example, now I have the other texture. Now the advantage is you can see with those veneers, you can quickly turn them on and off, have some quick studies done. Okay, and that's for example the way how you can use the decal for also putting materials over your complete objects, and then use this as a trick to quickly have maybe different design ideas stored, and you can easily turn them on and off. In the last part of this video, I would like to go a little bit more into detail in how to create very good wood materials. As you can see the bench, I added a new material too for the whole object. And I mentioned before, we can use decals either, for example, to place a logo on an already existing material, or we can use a decal to quickly simulate how a material might look like. But we can't really use a decal for covering a complete object and then editing the material, because basically this decal sits on top of the material. So in case we make this one let's say steel, and we put a decal over it, the image simply covers everything, and we don't have any control over reflectivity, etc. for the decal. So we simply have to create a new material for this table. And before I go into more details for the materials, I would like to point out one specific problem and how to solve it. What you see here is the wood texture nicely flowing, more or less. It has the same orientation. Let's go to the other side, and then let's take a look. And you see here that the wood texture has different orientations. Whenever you see something like this, the main reason is the following. So this is the sketch that drives that geometry. Here I have a blend curve, which you can see is tangent to those lines. And here I have an arc, a fillet. That's what I used to create. And while it says it's tangent, the problem with the fillet is this is a perfect circle, and then here it stops being a circle and it is immediately a line. So there's a break in the surface. And for example, with this blend curve, you can see at the end, this arc then quickly blends being a line and then flows into the line. So the transition between arc and line is smooth, and here it's abrupt. That's why the surface breaks. So we can do there instead, again, delete this fillet and then drag snap a new blend curve into it. And now you see also here, because along those lines the surface doesn't break, the texture is interpreted in a way so that it flows perfectly over the complete object. So after having this solved, let's take a look at the visual presentation or the effect of this wood material. You see when I'm rotating my view, the shininess actually seems to change. So what you see there in effect is actually a graphics trick. So we have one image with the color information for the wood texture, and then we have a black and white with grayscale image of the same texture to define, for example, where something should be reflective and where it should not be reflective, or how, for example, something should be, how much it should be reflective, so how smooth or blurry reflection should be. And that is called actually a specular map. So the color one we can call the color or diffuse map, specular map. And here on the left you see something just with the lines. That's called the bump map. That, for example, then can be used to simulate grooves or similar things. The main reason what you have to keep in mind, in computer graphics we're dealing with a flat surface but a wood surface is more three-dimensional. We have all these wood planks. Well, we could build each plank alone and then texture each plank, which will give us ultimately the best result, but it's also a lot of work. So we can combine basically the trick of different materials for the color, how reflective some areas are, and then for grooves, etc. And let the software simulate grooves by, for example, darkening these areas, adding shadows or highlights, and giving you the illusion actually of a three-dimensional surface, while in reality this is just plain flat. So let's see how we can do this actually in Fusion. So I'm going to appearance for this object. Here's my walnut. Let's double click it, advanced. Let's load the editor. And here you see under parameters for image or color, that's basically the wood texture we see. Then we have reflectance, that is for how reflective a surface is. Roughness, how rough the surface is. That, for example, defines the blurriness or the clearness of a reflection. Translucency, well, if it's translucent, doesn't apply to wood. And for example, here, the bump or relief, there we have another image, as you can see, walnut bump, that takes care of those grooves or the 3D structure. Here we have a walnut glossy texture that takes care of how something is rough or not. And here we have our color image. So all these three, for example, now we can replace. And what I do first is simply here, turn this one off. Let me actually rotate maybe to here so you can see what's going to happen when I turn this one to a slider. Zip, it's gone. And there you can see the roughness decides how far something is smooth and very reflective or clear reflective, and the reflectance in general just deals with if something is reflective and how much. Okay, so let's go to my desktop, and here I have veneer color. Okay, so this one has a size of 980 by 345, and let me show you a nice simple trick. I'm going to measure this length. This is 3 feet. Let's keep this one in mind. And we just go back to the appearance. And then let's go to edit image for the base color. And then here's source. We're going to swap out and use that veneer 1 texture there. Okay. Now, of course, the scale doesn't work, so let's uncheck the lock. And the width was 980 by 345. Okay, let's click the lock, so it's proportionally when we scale it. And now I measured that the width of my table, or the depth, is 3 feet. So here, this is height actually. So if I set height to 3 feet, check this one, I stretch basically my texture along the depth, and then the tiling continues tiling this texture. Let's see where it does. Oh, actually, I nearly fills it completely. Okay, I don't see it. But basically, now, as you can see, I made my texture so it totally fills this surface once. So I do not see a tile along the depth, and then along the length, it continues then that texture. Perfect. Okay, Click OK, done, there. So that's great. Now, for example, let's take a look at the reflectance, etc., or the roughness. So, and how we can, for example, adjust those values. So for roughness, I can, for example, open an image. Now, unfortunately, I only downloaded this veneer one. That was the only image I had, but that's not really a big problem. In any image editor like Photoshop, Pixelmator, GIMP, or even in the web, we can adjust these colors. So on the Mac side, I'm going to use Pixelmator, which is like a Photoshop clone. And what I can do now is, for example, I desaturate this image, so you see it. And then actually I invert my image. That's what you see here. So then I use the invert. And the main reason is where everything is, for example, black, it will be reflective, and where it is white, it will be less reflective. So this one I'm going to save as another image. For example, let's say veneer 1 specular. Export. And then here for roughness, I go to image. There is this image. Of course, scaling, etc. doesn't work, so here I have to redo the same thing. So width was 980 by 345. And I know this one then is 3 feet. Okay. And check out, there's our texture now set in a way that certain parts are only reflective and other areas are not reflective. Now actually, let me go back to Pixelmator. I'm going to invert this one. You see, actually, I forgot to mention this, and in one case I took this grayscale or desaturated one, and then I clamped actually the levels, so I have more black and white, so stronger contrast. And I'm going to export this one, for example, as specular, just version B. Because once we set our texture, we can easily adjust it, manipulate it, and simply then reload it. And now you see now that reflectivity effect is inverted. In general, because at one point we want to render this, I also advise to do this mainly actually inside the render environment. You get really the best results there. So for example, let me give you a quick introduction. We can click on environment. You have, for example, rotation. And you see when I rotate this one, you see where the light source actually comes from. And right now, to see a reflection, I need to have a light source in front of me. So maybe I rotate it so the shadows come towards me, like this. And let's hit render and then see what the effect will be. And now there you can see what's white, and that is actually part of the material that is actively reflective, and the rest is not reflective. So in our case, that's not really good. So let's go to parents. That's the material. So here, I'm simply going back to select my old version there. Apply, okay. And let's try the rendering again and see how this one looks. There you can see it. Now we can change, for example, the strength of the reflectivity to tone it down a little bit. But you see, this way basically you can give a little bit of variation also to the way how much the material is reflective, and it will look immediately a lot more realistic than when everything is like plastic, looking like too perfect. Because in reality, most surfaces, as long as it's not glass or polished material, it has a little bit of variation to it. Okay, let's disable this one and let's take a look at the last piece that's missing, the bump. So I'm going to Pixelmator again, and here I'm increasing the contrast a little bit. Maybe this might be enough. Let's see. Export. And bump. So all I need is white. That means the surface remains untouched, and what's black, this will tell me that there will be like grooves. There's bump. Open. And of course the thing doesn't work correctly, so also here again I have to adjust the settings, so 980 by 345. Then I can set the height a little bit too much, so maybe 0.1 inch. And of course here this one 3 feet. Whoops. Okay, let's try this one again. So there you can see now actually what this bump is doing. And of course the depth is way too much. So again, you know, this is a fake trick. You see there are obviously some grooves, but along the edge of my object, so where the geometry ends, I don't really see this groove to be continued. So this is proof that this is just a visual trick. It just adds highlights and shadows and gives you the illusion of like a three-dimensional depth. 2.5 is better. 0.1, yeah, 0.1 seems to be good. Done. Maybe make this one more reflective. And here, for a moment, let's turn this one off. So we only can pay attention to the reflectivity and the bump mapping, and there you can really see nicely those grooves, how they work. Pretty fantastic. So you see, you can work with either just with the bump. You need to have the right size, or you can also then combine that with like a roughness. We could even actually, instead of for the roughness, use an image for the reflectance. So specular here, open. And I have to do the same, of course. So 980, 345, link, and 3 feet. Okay. And on there, for example, you only see what is reflective and what's not reflective. And actually, if I click on invert image, you can see I can invert the result. And now, interestingly, there you see that everything, ooh, I rotated way too much. Let's go back to here. Everything that's reflective, that's actually on the top surfaces, and the grooves are not reflective. If I flip it, you see the grooves are reflective, the top surface not really, I think. Or let's double check and let's turn on the rendering. Sometimes those real-time renderings can be deceiving. So this way, for example, I can decide where something should be reflective and where not. That's what I do with the reflectance. And if I want the reflection to be clear or not, then I can do with the roughness. And that's basically all the tricks to it to create a somewhat believable wood material or any other material. Because again, I can't stress this enough. With a software, it's too easy to make everything perfect, but in reality, in natural life, it is not. There's a lot of variation and chaos in our materials, and to get a realistic feel for it, we just have to use materials that simulate that imperfection. And that basically concludes everything. I think at this point that's important to know about how to create different materials like wood floors or wood furniture, walls with wallpaper or something like that, how to apply decals. And maybe as a closing part, I can show you how we can do rendering. So you see I'm inside this render part. Let me explain you how this works a little bit. So this is for appearance, okay? That is for environment. And in environment, what we can say basically is we can select different environments. For example, rim light or sharp light. We can rotate the slide. So you can see it creates a shadow. We have an exposure. If, for example, everything is too dark or too bright, we can slide this one and adjust it. Think about like developing a film on a camera. We can have the background color either from the environment. So for example, if I go to snowfield, I think it will be bluish. Yep. Or I can actually set a custom color, for example, white. If, for example, I would like to position this one onto, let's say, a presentation board. Then I have a ground shadow for a drop shadow. If I want, I could also turn on ground reflection. I personally never use those. I think they always look odd. As long as you don't maybe want to have something like this specifically. Let's see, what do we have with warm light? And you also might have noticed that based on kind of like the lighting, also your material slightly might look different. What's up with soft light? Let's take a look. Yeah, not much difference. And then when, for example, you like a specific view, you can turn on this enable ray tracing. We have different qualities for quick. So quick really makes a quick rendering. The shadows are really bad, but you get a faster preview. And then if you want to have a final rendering, you can set this one to a higher quality, and Fusion crashed. Okay, so here I'm back. I have everything somewhat recreated the same way. And let's go back to the rendering. So with the 3D cube, you can find yourself a nice maybe angle you really like to work with. Let it work for a certain amount of time till, for example, the image is clear. You can see right now it's kind of grainy. And then once you're okay, you can pause it and then go to capture image. This is kind of like the size of the image we're going to have. Click OK, go to rendering, save. And if you want to, you could even, oh no, on purpose actually, I'm trying to scale this one. And maybe go to this view and save it. So you see right now, this is actually just more or less a screenshot from the real-time 3D engine. So this is not like a really rendered image. It's more using the graphics card to quickly give you a coarse representation of how actually it might look like. You see, for example, the drop shadow is very strong. This has a more graphical quality, which can be really good if, for example, you would like to have some certain render variations. So maybe let's call this one rendering 2, and maybe I change, just for the sake of demonstration, the angle. So, and we call this one rendering 3, save. And we go back to the Finder and to my desktop or wherever you saved it. And there is rendering, rendering, and rendering on the Mac spacebar. And then there we can see, take a look at all those different images. So you see this is really nice. Before I spend the time on the final rendering, simply make a screenshot, quality, and compare maybe different views. And then once you like something, then you can do the rendering. Now in comparison, for example, you can see how the drop shadow here is more realistic. Here it's very graphical. So you see two different results, two different applications. And that nearly is pretty much everything in a nutshell about how to texture and render in Fusion. I don't have the Windows side right now, but I can show this on the Mac side. So if I, for example, wait, I have to use this one. Open the material editor and move my mouse over this text and then let it rest. You see actually I get a small pop-up, and that tells me where on my computer, in what folder actually this material is. So when I go back to my Finder, here you can see I followed that direction and I have all the materials, so the images the software currently comes with. For example, for fabric, or somewhere is leather and paper. And for us, for the moment, the most interesting are the wood images. So, for example, I just would like to see all the walnuts. So walnut here, there, there, and there, and there. Okay, spacebar. Let's show them all. And there we actually see the color, the bump, which is really black and white, but mainly white. And then you have actually three other images. So this one has some white, but it's mainly black, some white, but mainly mid-gray, some white, mainly a bright gray. And you see when I move my mouse over one image, up here it says the name. So this is for the roughness, so glossy and rough. This means, for example, varnished and rough. And this is, for example, just rough. So you see, the more black, the more glossy it, for example, is. And just rough, for example, that's just more or less, let's say, maybe an untreated surface. So you have more brighter colors. So the white basically inside the cracks makes it, of course, very rough, because it's not something that we can polish. So if I take wood and put veneer, not veneer, polyurethane over it, later I could polish that one, but I do not get into the cracks. That's the reason why the cracks are white. And again, black, really polished, and the more it gets brighter, it gets less polished, so the reflective image will be more blurry. And that's pretty much the same what I did inside Pixelmator. Okay, that now really was everything.